This is the GMS Magazine podcast, a show about role playing games, board games, and the people who make them. I am Paco Garcia, your host, and this is the RPG Interview Room, the show in which I am lucky enough to get together with some of the best people in the world of role playing games and ask them a ton of questions about their projects, their games, their dreams, and whatever it is they are doing. I'm getting together today with Connor Alexander. He is the person behind Coyote and Crow, a game that really touched an awful lot of people when it came to Kickstarter because it showcases an alternative future and science fiction, science fantasy future where the Americas have not been colonized and people, civilizations have been allowed to continue advancing as they would without any colonization or any European intervention. I was very curious about this and I bought the book. Well, it was given to me for Christmas this year in 2023. I haven't had the chance to read it yet, just taking a look at how it's been produced. So I needed to ask Connor a ton of questions. It has been an absolutely fantastic interview. I am so privileged to have been able to talk to him, and I really hope that you will enjoy this as much as I did having him around. I really cannot wait to talk to him again. Meanwhile, people, if you want to be featured in our podcast, please do get in touch. Podcast at gmsmagazine.com is our email address. I am not the fastest at replying, but I shall, I promise you that. And get in touch as well on Facebook, where I'm also at GMS Magazine. You can find me on Blue Sky also, Paco GMS Magazine at B Sky Social, and of course at Twitter, where I am also at GMS Magazine. So, well, take a look at all the links and the show notes. Everything is there. And if I'm missing anything, do let me know, and I will put it there. But for the time being, I really hope that you enjoy this interview. I'll talk to you soon. Connor, welcome to the show. This has been a very long time coming because
Yeah.
I have known you in Facebook for a very long time. I have followed your progression in role playing games with Coyote and Crow and everything for a while.
Yeah.
And I've always been like, I need to talk to this guy. I need to talk to this guy. And I thought, look, I'm just going to ask.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's
and
great. I'm so glad you did.
So, firstly, I know that I've asked you this thing before we started, but for
Mhm.
the humans out there, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I'm not really looking forward to a lot of the traveling I'm going to be doing in the next couple of months, but I am deep in game design work at the moment,
Mhm.
and that's kind of my happy place. So I'm really enjoying that.
So, by any chance, that huge amount of traveling is going to involve Spiel? You coming to Essen?
So that was on my radar for this year. Unfortunately, I got another offer that I just couldn't pass up. It was sort of a once in a lifetime trip offer, and so I'm taking them up on that offer. So I won't be doing Spiel till next year. Sorry.
Sad face, but at the same time,
That
happy
face.
face. So
Yeah,
that's fine because
yeah,
it's a good thing that you had this, whatever it is that is the surprise thing.
yeah.
That hopefully would be, I don't know, it would be like great if you came back from that and then said, Paco, by the way, you know that trip? Yeah, I just managed to sign a multi-million dollars to make a movie about the game.
That would be fantastic.
Wouldn't it just?
That would be.
Netflix, here we come. So,
Yeah. Right.
okay, let's start with you a little bit because of course, I do know about Coyote and Crow, and I have seen your posts in Facebook. So I cannot claim that I know you well because we haven't spoken, but
Sure.
I have a good idea of where you're coming from. But there might be an awful lot of people out there who do not. So
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about you. What's your involvement in games, and what have you done?
Yeah. So I started just as a fan of games. I grew up with board games and sort of general nerdery. I was into comics and sci-fi and fantasy television shows, like a lot of nerds are. And I didn't really get involved in the game industry at all until 2014. And at that point, I started working at a retail game shop. I was managing a retail game shop here in Seattle, and really quickly, it sort of rekindled my passion for games. I mean, like I said, I've always been a gamer, but I think working in that environment and getting to be around other people who were as passionate as I was about games really sort of stoked those fires. And shortly after that, I was recruited by a distributor, a company called PSI that does a lot of game distribution both in the United States and globally. And sort of getting to see the sort of behind the scenes of not just the distribution process, but the production process, because I was an account manager. So I got to work with a lot of publishers and see sort of how some of these games are made and the processes they go through. And that's when I started to realize that, hey, I think maybe I have something to contribute here. And, I've had all these years of gameplay and a thorough knowledge of the entire industry supply line and how it all sort of comes to be made. And my company was very supportive, and I did that, in my spare time for years. And then the Kickstarter took off for Coyote and Crow, and I didn't really, I honestly thought it was going to make me between $18,000 and $25,000. I just wanted to make my money back and, get the book out into the world. And I think once it took off to the extent that it did, I really had to sort of re-examine my priorities and decide whether or not I wanted to make the leap into being a publisher on my own. And that's has come with its burdens and tough times, but it's also allowed me a lot of freedom creatively. So I have to be thankful for that. But yeah, so now it's been 2 years, and since Coyote and Crow, really took off, and since then I've put out 4 or 5, maybe 6 different products, and I'm working toward fulfilling my next full board game, a standalone board game, and then I've got 2 others that I'm in the middle of developing right now.
That sounds
So,
super,
busy times.
super exciting. Okay, tell me,
Yeah.
let's start with, tell me with Coyote and Crow. What is the game all
Mhm.
about? Because this is, I haven't been able to read it yet. I did
Okay.
get the book, and I've recorded, which I think I need to re-record because I think there was some sort of issue. The unbooking video to take a look at what the production values were, and I wanted to ask you a few
Yeah.
questions about that. But tell me what
Sure.
Coyote and Crow is about and what makes it special.
Yeah, so I think first of all, I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, and indigenous rights, indigenous representation is really important to me. Accurate indigenous representation, and as a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, I felt like there weren't a lot of people in the hobby game industry that were presenting accurate, positive portrayals authentically of Native people. And as a big sci-fi nerd, I really wanted to put a game out there that spoke to both of those sensibilities, my indigeneity, as well as sci-fi and fantasy that I love. And so I created a tabletop role-playing game that is set in an alternate future where colonization of the Americas never happened. Basically, about 700 years in the past, there's this climate disaster that affects the whole Earth. And 700 years later, now we're into the future, near future, and the Americas were never colonized. And instead, all of the nations that survived that climate disaster in the Americas have sort of come full circle and evolved into these advanced civilizations. And so a lot of the conflict in the game comes from tensions between these fictional nations, but then also you have, as the Earth is healing and has repaired itself from this disaster, you have opportunities to explore outside of the Americas, so the characters can go exploring around the world, or you can also be tackling sort of mythological and legendary spirits and creatures that are, originally presumed to be sort of mythical tales in as they are in our world, and believed in to some degree, as where in my game they've sort of come to life. And so you have the opportunity to interact with spirits and legends and creatures that were only tales told around the fire previously. So it's a good. I think it's a good mix of fantasy and science fiction elements.
Okay, that sounds. I mean, obviously, I like the sound of it because otherwise I wouldn't have, got the game.
Yeah, yeah.
which is quite exciting from that point of view. But the question is how did you go about making sure that the indigenous representation was as true as it could possibly be, not just from the point of view of ourselves today, but how they
Yeah.
could have evolved, how they could have advanced if
Yeah.
Europe hadn't fucked up.
Yeah. So a lot of that has to do with the fact that pretty early on, while I have a good imagination and an ability to do research, I also had to really early on realize that a lot of information about what indigenous societies were like prior to colonial contact, there's not a lot of good record keeping, but instead we're relying a lot on oral storytelling and information passed down through a colonial history filter, right? Like it's hard to sometimes figure out what information is accurate and what has been distorted through history. So I think what I tried to do was I really early on, I brought on other writers to get sort of a different perspective, whether it was specific to their tribal or national histories, but then also just functionally people who had different education. For example, in the food section of the book, we talk about what foods these people would eat. I brought on an actual chef, an indigenous chef who specializes in pre-colonial foods. And so I had her write the whole chapter. She just didn't consult. She actually wrote the whole chapter on indigenous foods for the book. And then even created a menu for a fictional restaurant. So we have in the book, there's a sample menu for a fictional restaurant. And so I think, I think one of my greatest strengths as a game producer is knowing what I don't know. And I'm very humble about saying, I don't know that. I do not know what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to go find somebody who does know what they're talking about. And then working them into that process. And so we did that with language. We did that with weaponry. I got a lot of folks involved who really kind of knew what they were talking about. And then we all just sort of collaborated together and worked on like, hey, if we hadn't, if we didn't have access to gunpowder, how would science have propelled the existing technology forward? Like, what would that try to look like? And I think we're pretty successful on it. We've gotten a lot of compliments, especially on our language. We created an entire fictional language for the game. It's a trade language, a Creole trade language that is based on a number of language groups in the Great Lakes area of North America. And I'd love to see it as fully fleshed out as Elvish or Klingon someday. Have actual fans of the game being out there speaking Chahi. That would be lovely.
That would be absolutely amazing. By the way, apologies about the dog, but he's kind of mental at the time, and he lives here, so it's not as if I can ask him to go. So sorry about that.
All good.
So in Coyote and Crow, what kind of characters can one create? What can I be there?
Yeah. So. The sort of core conceit for the characters in the game is that your characters are supposed to be epic heroes that maybe you're at the start of their epic hero journey, and generations from now, people will be telling stories about them around the fireplace. So this is a game where you're supposed to be having characters that are really going to be going on big adventures. So your characters tend to be a little more powerful, a little more capable than your average citizen. And while there are things similar to Dungeons and Dragons as far as like class, we call it archetype in the game. So there's warrior, scout, seeker, healer, whisperer, and tinkerer. There are those 6 general archetypes. They're very loose archetypes. I don't like I never was a fan in Dungeons and Dragons of that whole idea of once you've chosen your class, your capabilities are kind of siloed into that class. You're sort of pigeoned into that class system. So instead, for my game, it really just amounts to a couple of stat bonuses and a couple of skill bonuses at character creation. And from there, you can decide who and what your character is. And then they're far more fleshed out by the skills they choose, and by the backgrounds that they create. And so I think one of the things that sort of makes our world building and our character generation unique is the idea that early on, when you're creating your character, you choose a path and then an ability. And a path in this world is something that all the adolescents of this world choose as they're sort of coming into adulthood, and they connect to an animal. And we offer 15 paths in the core book. There will be more in future expansions, but there's 15 in the core book. And there are things like Path of the Bear or Path of the Eagle. And the idea is that it not only sort of socially and culturally bonds you to that animal, but then also there's a physical component there too, where you're taking a sample of this tissue called Adanadi tissue. And Adanadi is this sort of it sort of surfs the line between a scientific and a mythical substance that is it's like a birthmark on every living thing out there. Every plant and animal out there has this little sort of purple mark on it that's happened since the climate changing event. And over the years, they sort of learned to refine this substance, this stain, this purple stain. And so when somebody, say, picks the Path of the Bear, they incorporate a little bit of that Adanadi tissue from the bear into themselves, and it gives them an ability, a superhuman ability. And I wouldn't call anybody in this game a superhero. Nobody is flying around or shooting lasers from their eyes or anything like that. But it does give them something that gives them a slightly greater than human ability. And I think when characters, hopefully, when people make characters in this game and they choose one of the archetypes, let's say warrior, and then they choose, say, Path of the Eagle, and then they choose a power, one of the abilities that are under that path chart. Hopefully they start to get a sense of who that character is, and what they're about. But I think the thing that really makes them human in this game, that really sort of is one of my favorite things in the gameplay, is the gifts and burdens system. And gifts and burdens are these sort of more intangible things that make us human beings, right? They can be familial connections or rivals or addictions, things that we're compelled to do. All of these different things that really make us human beings, and we have slight game modifiers, and you can get more as the game goes on, or sometimes you get rid of them, just like we all sort of evolve through life. But I think for me, those are the things that really kind of flesh out the characters beyond just being a list of stats. And to me, a list of stats was always the most boring thing about role-playing games. It felt very detached and mechanical. So I'm a fan of gifts and burdens.
That's fair enough indeed. And that moves me to my next inquiry, which is, what are the mechanics like? Because I don't think that you went for any kind of OGL type of D20, generic system.
Yeah, no,
you went for your own system.
Yes, and that was a conscious choice early on. I really didn't want to ride on the coattails of D&D in any way. I wanted this thing to stand on its own completely. I mean, I certainly acknowledge the history of Dungeons and Dragons and the impact it's had on tabletop role-playing. But I wanted my system to never feel beholden or connected to that system. So our system is a really rules-light system that if folks are understanding the rules, they hopefully don't ever have to crack open the book very often. Hopefully they're playing it right from the table and right from their character sheet. It is a D12 based system, and it's a dice pool system. So your character rolls a number of 12-sided dice, and then is given a success number. That number is usually 8 or 9, somewhere in there. And anything higher than an 8 or a 9 is a success. So if you rolled 5 12-sided dice and you got 3 9s, then you'd have 3 successes. And if that was a non-combat situation, maybe you're doing some sort of computer hacking, maybe you needed 4 or 5 successes in order to get something done. So that you wouldn't have succeeded yet. Maybe you partially succeeded. And in a combat situation, if that was that same set of dice and those same number of successes, and you got 3 successes, then you do 3 points of damage to your opponent. So it's a fairly rules light system, and it allows for a lot of flexibility, and keeps the game focused on storytelling rather than a bunch of number crunching.
That's good, because I am not. As I get older, I'm increasingly less and less interested in numbers. I just want to know,
Yeah.
how much does that contribute to what I have done?
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
it. So I'm
Yes.
And the fact that it's this, I also like dice pools. Not Shadowrun size dice pool, like
Yes.
20,
Yes.
not 20 dice or 30 dice, please, not that many.
Yeah.
But 5 or 7, yeah, I quite enjoy that. Okay, so that's pretty much all I wanted to know about, character creation and the mechanics of the game. Because what I am truly interested in is the world itself and the production of the book. The production of the book, because the first thing I thought when I saw it was, shit, another 400 pages, person killing brick. And I was like, oh, I'm never going to get into this. And then I opened the book and I thought, this has been designed so dyslexics can read this, because I can read it like that.
Yes, thank you for noticing.
Because I am a pretty seriously dyslexic person, and whenever I see any font that's too small or is too narrow or there are not enough separation, it's like, you didn't want me to read that book, but you wanted me to read that book.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for noticing. Thank you. That was a decision we talked about early on, especially with my graphics and layout person. We talked about fonts, we talked about point size, all of those things. It was really important that we focused on accessibility as much as possible. Originally, the book was supposed to be about 300 pages. And I think because of the success of the Kickstarter, we went back and sort of added some more material in, and the page count began to grow. And a lot of my writers were like, well, why don't we squeeze the point size down to fit more information in? And I was like, no, let's leave it at 14 point, and let's save some of this material for expansion books. Like we've got a lot of material here already. It's already going to be a big book, and I want to leave it. I want to leave it feeling like it's got room to breathe. I want the pages to feel big and open. And that's why the book is slightly physically larger. I think it's 11.25 inches by 8.25 inches. So it's a very physically big book, as well as the point size being big.
Well,
and yeah,
I did. I mean, to be honest, I did like it that way for 2 reasons. Firstly, because it is easy to read, and I do layout work for my day job, not on a daily basis because I also do instructional design, but I do it very often. And accessibility is a big thing for me, because otherwise I cannot read what I'm meant to be designing, which is limiting. So I really enjoy that. But also, to be honest, once you weigh the book and the quality of that paper and the hardback, I will feel a lot safer when the zombie apocalypse comes, because that is going to knock off a few heads if needed to,
Yeah, it's almost 5 pounds. Yeah,
it's huge. Why? And this is another question: why did you go for such huge quality? Because you could have saved on an awful lot of money and weight and size if you had gone for 60-gram paper instead of, I believe that's 80 or 90, isn't it? It is pretty heavy.
So I think there's a lot of I don't want to upset anybody here. When it comes to tabletop role-playing games, I think there are a lot of designers and writers out there that tend to undervalue their own work. And I think that because they are producing in this sort of indie space, they take their ideas and go, oh, I'm just going to put out like a 20-page soft cover. That's fine. If that's your goal, that's great. I don't want to knock anybody for doing that. And maybe you're going to sell some on your Kickstarter, and maybe you're going to sell some on your website or through your Venmo or whatever it is you're doing. That's great. But for me, a lot of this was about visibility, about people, especially non-native people, seeing natives in a different light. And so a goal for me when I started this was that I wanted this book to be able to sit on a shelf next to Dungeons and Dragons and feel like it belonged next to Dungeons and Dragons or Shadowrun or Pathfinder, like it belonged there. And so for me, making that was a statement about like, hey, this is not a cheap thing here. Like we're going all in. So I wanted quality paper. I wanted the spot UV on the cover. I wanted all of these things to make it look like a real quality product. And if that cost me a little bit, then okay. But it was important to me to have that feel like it belonged on that shelf, like it was a premium product.
On the one hand, and I hope I can phrase this correctly, but on the one hand, I truly admire you for going that extra mile and creating that kind of quality product, even though I bet it costs you a fair deal more than it could have otherwise.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I feel really, it's kind of upsetting the fact that you felt that you had to go that way for people to appreciate your book, because Coyote and Crow, regardless of 60 or 90 grams paper, have the same value and the same place and the same space.
Yeah.
That anything else out there, not just D&D, that is the 800-pound gorilla in the cage, but anything else out there. Ouch.
Yeah. I feel like, especially natives right now, we get so few chances to be heard by non-natives. We're so used to talking in our closed circles and dealing with helping each other out with our own issues internally, that we're almost traumatized by non-natives and their reaction to us. We're to the point where I don't think we think there's opportunities out there to reach out beyond those circles. So when I saw that the Kickstarter was taking off, I thought, I need to go all the way in. I need to go all the way in as loudly as possible and make as big a splash as I can, because I might not be back in this position again. This might be my one chance to get some attention. So
no, that is very fair enough. And for disclosure, although of course our experiences are not at all the same, because I'm Spanish. I have, even though I'm part Roma, I have white skin privilege, so I have never really experienced the full Roma experience, which is, I suppose, the closest thing that I could empathize with Native Americans in the United States. But I can understand what it is that I need to take this opportunity to scream about. I am just as good as you, even if I have, that means making 3 times the effort. Which is mighty frustrating. So how has Coyote and Crow being accepted outside of a Kickstarter? Because the Kickstarter went very well. And I also, before we go into that, how come you did not expect, how come you thought, if I make my money by that would be the end? How come did you not expect that Coyote and Crow was going to do so well? Because from the offset, it looked absolutely and sounded absolutely amazing.
Well, thank you. I think I was aware that I had a unique idea, that I had something that hadn't been done before. But I think I was also trying to weigh in the fact that, I was a first-time publisher. No one knew who I was. Working for the distributor PSI meant that while I knew a lot of industry folks, consumers didn't know who I was. So I was an unknown, working with a bunch of unknown writers. I mean, I was pulling all native writers and artists, and most of these folks, I think only one or two of them had ever worked with role playing games before, and never in a major capacity. So it wasn't like I was pulling well-known names on board. I really think that it boiled down to not thinking that the idea, well, I knew the idea was good. I didn't necessarily believe that non-natives would be interested in this world, like that it just wouldn't speak to them at all. And I was sort of half right on that. I think that one of the reasons that it took off is because it was such a good idea, and it did have some really cool, fresh perspective that even non-natives could appreciate. But going to the other part of your question, which is how has it been received? I still see a lot of non-native people afraid to play the game, and I think I've been seeing that in a lot of games where I'm hearing about it with a lot of games that are focused on a marginalized community, whether we're talking about like Thirsty Sword Lesbians or Arun or any of the other like sort of Afrocentric games. I think white folks or non-natives are sometimes afraid to tackle Coyote and Crow because they're afraid that they're going to be inappropriate or culturally appropriative. And I get that impulse. I get it. I just wish they'd get over it.
It's a tricky one because I can understand why, because I would feel the same way. But to be honest, the way that I have got over it is pretty much saying they gave me the game. I kind of have permission to get it wrong.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
If I get it wrong, I think it's just a matter of understanding that if somebody tells you, hey, that is kind of wrong, just don't get uppity about it. That's it. You've it's like when somebody plays a queer game, you get the queer representation wrong. Just be prepared to be told by a queer person, look, that's not how it is.
Yeah. Well, and I think at least what I hope is happening around tables is that if a non-native is playing and they get something wrong, I would hope that if there was a native at the table, they would understand that if the person is a true bigot or a jerk, they're probably not going to want to play this game in the first place, which means that they're just a well-intended person who got something wrong. And hopefully that native can take that person aside at a later point and go, hey, here's where you got that wrong. And it's a chance for a little bit of learning and discussion. I think for me, my two biggest goals with Coyote and Crow were, one, to give natives a positive, uplifting, cool way to see themselves in a role-playing game that maybe they hadn't seen before, but then also to give non-natives an entryway into this world, into the world of indigenous folklore and indigenous ideas, and have it be a way that they can partake in that without feeling like they're stepping on any toes or causing any real problems. And we tried to make it as safe as possible for non-natives to play in there. Hopefully we got that right.
Well, I'm sure they will. I mean, to be honest, I think it's just a matter of how they want to take it, because I get the feeling that definitely what Coyote and Crow does is to tell people you can play, but you're playing us, not the notion of us that you have learned throughout your life, which is, as far as my limited understanding goes, really different from real life and real history.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I won't name any names, but there are a couple of games out there that are in game stores right now that have Native American themes or concepts skinned onto them, and there were no natives involved in the creation of those games. If we're lucky, there was a person at the end of the process who gave a seal of approval saying there's nothing offensive here. But really, there are so few games out there right now being designed by natives. Clee Benali just did one called Burn the Fort. He's an indigenous designer who created a game on GameFound called Burn the Fort. And I love his game because it comes from a completely different perspective than mine, right? Mine was, I want to remove the colonialization from my whole setting and have a role-playing game about a future utopia. His is, no, we're going the other way around here. You're going to play a real native character from history who is attempting to burn down a colonial fort before they get supplies. And I love that. It's great.
That sounds like, so I need to look into that one now, because if
Yeah.
anything, that sounds absolutely hilarious to me. It sounds like, oh, let's try to do that now. Let's fuck these invaders up. I love the sound of that.
Yes.
What
Yes.
on a more personal level, what has it been like for you to go through the development and publishing process of Coyote and Crow? Because I can imagine that that must have been quite a journey.
Yeah, it's weird because I think I've grown up wearing a lot of different hats in my career. I've done a lot of different things in my life. And so I've always known a little bit about a lot of things. And so I knew that was going to help me going into this. At the same time, oh my gosh, the learning curves and the mistakes that I made along the way. I could write a whole book on all the mistakes I made. And it's been, I'm still learning right now. I'm still learning all the ins and outs as I transition more into a game company that's also making just traditional tabletop games in addition to role-playing games, because there's a whole different set of guidelines and rules and traditions going on there. So it's been a very surreal experience. I never thought I would find sort of a new calling when I was 50. I mean, the Kickstarter took off when I was 50, and I'm 53 now, and I feel like I'm in an entirely new chapter of my life. So yeah, it hasn't been always great. Like there's been times when I've wanted to walk out the door and just call it a day. But at the same time, I'm always continually surprised by how many people have been touched by Coyote and Crow in some way. And my original goal, I always told my partner Jen, I said, my goal for the game is that one day, this was before the Kickstarter, I said one day I want this game to be out, and I want one native person that I don't know to come up to me at a convention and say, I loved Coyote and Crow. And that has happened dozens of times already, dozens. So by that measure, I'm blown away by my success, right? So now I'm just trying to set higher goals. I'm trying to set bigger and more lofty goals for myself, whether it's book donations or connecting with native communities, more altruistic goals. Obviously, I want to pay my rent and pay my bills and survive, but where I can, I really want to start giving back to my indigenous cousins wherever and whenever I can.
It's absolutely wonderful. What has been the most rewarding aspect of going through all this process for you? What's the thing that you'd say, yeah, I want to do this again?
There was a very specific moment at I attended a very small, it wasn't even a convention, it was just an event. And it was a native focused event, and they had a lot of crafts for sale and some musicians and a lot of small local vendors. And there was a little boy who was there with his parents. His parents were one of the other vendors, and he came over to my booth and was just sort of attracted by all the games and the colors and everything. And he eventually told me that he had a gift card. He had a credit card for his birthday that had some money on it, like a fixed debit card. And he asked about how much my book was, and I told him it was $70, which is really pricey for like a 9-year-old kid, right? But I let him look at one of the copies. I had a couple of display copies, and him and his friend, he had a little girlfriend there who was about his age, and they just really got into it and started wanting to make characters. And after about an hour of coming back and asking me questions and looking at stuff, it was like back and forth for like an hour. He said he wanted to buy the game. So I gave him the game, and then I gave him a set of dice to go with it for free. I said, happy birthday. It was his birthday, that he had the card. And I was like, happy birthday, here, have some dice too. And seeing the both of them light up, and the fact that like a half an hour later, he came back to me and said, I'm going to make a warrior character and I'm going to give him really high spirit rank because you need spirit to be a good leader. And he's going to be a leader because warriors should be leaders. And I was like, all of that right there made everything I had done worth it. It reminded me so much of how I felt when I was a little kid and I found role-playing games and how it just fueled my imagination. He was just completely lit up and transformed. And more moments like that are all I need.
That is such a beautiful story, and I hope one day that kid listens to this podcast or any other, and gets in touch with you and says, I am also going to publish my own game thanks to you. That would be,
yeah, that would be
that would be absolutely unbelievable. And what's been the biggest challenge that you have faced during this process?
So I hope this doesn't come off harshly, but working with the folks that I want to work with, the indigenous folks, I want to work with indigenous writers and indigenous artists. That has been a real challenge because systemically, a lot of those folks are not able to do those creative things full time. They're waiters or they're, whatever their day job is, right? And so when I want to work with the folks I want to work with, because I'm in a professional setting, I sort of need them to be at a professional level. But it's really hard sometimes for them to do the things that they are contracting with me to do. COVID comes up, or family emergencies, or they get sick, or they have to work, or whatever it is, life comes up, right? And so I think already in the game industry in general, we have a lot of people who are in the industry because they love games and not because they have a history of making games. They don't necessarily have a big professional history working for a large company. They're just passionate about games. So I get a lot of people who want to work with me, who are passionate and creative, but they don't have the professional skills, which means I end up playing a lot of, I end up playing the role of a sort of a hand holder into that role of like, yes, I'm your boss because I'm contracting with you, but I'm also your friend and I'm trying to teach you how to be a better professional in this industry because in theory, they want to work in this industry full time. And so I would say the biggest challenge for me has been getting folks to get to that professional level, to meet their deadlines, to understand file formats and all of those other things that go along with publishing into a professional industry. And sometimes it means that like I'll set goals for the company and I have to push those goals back because everybody underneath me can't hit those markers. They can't get to those goals. And so that's been frustrating, but it is what it is. And I would rather work with enthusiastic indigenous folks than non-enthusiastic, non-indigenous folks.
But the thing is, and again, this is what I tend to get very sensitive about these issues because it strikes me is so unfair that they haven't had the chance to be in a position of already being that professional, that they need. It has been necessary an indigenous person to get the means to become their employer and at the same time a mentor, so they can be in a position to be that professional person to anybody else.
Yes, absolutely. I have to recognize how privileged I am because as much as Coyote and Crow was a good idea, I'm not sure that if I didn't know everything that I knew along the way, working at a retail game shop and then working for a distributor and seeing all those things behind the scenes, I'm not sure that if I just had the idea, it would have landed the way it did because I knew all of those things professionally beforehand to get myself set up for success. And so then I have to question, well, how privileged am I along the way? I mean, I'm a white passing native. If people don't know, a lot of times they just assume I'm fully European. And yeah, I've got a lot of Scottish pale genes in here. But so, how many times in my life did I benefit from that privilege along the way?
But that's the thing. To me, the point is they should have got that opportunity already from white people.
Yeah.
It should not be necessary for somebody from a native nation to come and intentionally find them. They should have already
Yeah.
got, because it is obvious
Yeah.
that they are capable, they are willing, and they are talented enough to get the job done. They
Yes.
shouldn't have had to wait for this opportunity. They should have already got it a very, very long time
Absolutely.
ago. And that I find,
Absolutely.
damn it, everybody's missing out. It's so. Oh, I'm sorry. I get very passionate about this thing because it's.
I do as well. It's infuriating, and I see, like, going back to some of those other games that I've seen that don't have good representation as far as their design team or their art team. I try to explain to some of those publishers, if I'm friends with the publisher or I know the publisher on a first name basis, I'll sort of take them aside and go, look, you missed an opportunity here. It's not just about accuracy. It's about the fact that your game could have been better, because there are things you're not going to know that designer, a native designer or a native artist or a native writer, could have added to the game, and you missed it. You missed that opportunity, and it's gone now. And that's tragic to me. That's sad.
I agree. And also, because to be perfectly honest, I think we should start getting into the mind frame, that part of the quality of the game comes from how much it empowers the people who make them.
Yes. Absolutely.
And to me, when I see a small zine that's been created by somebody who's felt like, now I can make my dream, or I see Coyote and Crow or 30 Swords Lesbians or that sort of thing, it's a bit like, this is what games should also be all about. I'm not going to knock off the, mass-produced games, D&D or anything like that. I'm okay with that. But this, it has to have some value, and we have to learn to recognize that, because it matters a lot, and it should matter a lot to everyone. So I think we still have an awful lot to learn as an audience about these kind of topics. Now, I have a really difficult question to ask. Okay, and if you don't want to answer it, that's totally fine. But I have to ask the question, and is which one of the multiple awards you've got is your favorite?
Oh.
That's evil, I know. And you don't have
that is evil. That is evil.
No, okay, let's forget that. But let's talk about those awards. I mean, dude, leave some for somebody else. I mean, you're getting, apart from everything is yours now.
It's a lot of it's behind me here, and I'm really humbled by it. Even though the Kickstarter was a success, I certainly didn't expect any kind of some of the recognition that I got. Origins Award, the two from the Tabletop Awards, the Nebula Award nomination for game writing, and then the Diana Jones Award, and then the Crit Award that I just got at Gen Con. All of those are fantastic. I think the one that is the most awe-inspiring for me would have to be the Diana Jones Award. I think it's one thing for me to stand out amongst RPGs, and I do feel like what I provided was a pretty unique RPG experience, or unusual. But the Diana Jones Award, as it's sort of an insider award, right? Like, a lot of folks outside of the game industry don't know what it is, but within the game industry, being recognized by folks that I would call my peers is huge. And that award specifically, I don't know, it's going to stay with me for a long time. It means a lot. And because it's more than just about being an RPG at that point. It's about, providing something really special to the game industry that year. And considering some of the other nominees, to just be listed in the same company with them, it really hit home hard. That meant a lot.
I can understand that, because for those people who don't know about the Diana Jones Awards, I equate them to getting a PhD, because they don't give the award just because the game is good, but because it has contributed something that didn't exist before to the world of gaming. So that it means that you have gone beyond what has been accomplished before. Not just that you have created a great game, but that it's gone beyond what anybody else has created. So to me, the Diana Jones Awards is probably the most meaningful award that there is out there in the world of role-playing games right now. So it would be great to see more from future games, which talking about what's coming for Coyote and Crow, because I refuse to believe that you're not going to do anything else with the
game. No, we have a lot of stuff going on. So right now we just finished our Kickstarter campaign for our board game Wolves, which is a standalone game. I really feel like that game is going to be hit or miss for people.
Okay.
They're going to love it, or it's not going to be their thing at all. It is a 3 to 6 player, which is already a strange number for board games. 3 to 6 player semi-cooperative game, and you're all working together to survive through a winter. You're playing the leader of a small community, and you're trying to share resources. And the game is unusual in that it's not a true cooperative game. You are trying to win at the end, but there can only be an individual winner at the end of the game if everyone survives the winter. If any community fails during the course of this year, everybody loses the game. So you're sort of incentivized to make sure your neighbors have enough resources. I really think it's going to be hit or miss. You're going to love it or hate it, but that's okay. I'm all right with that. And then I've started writing the next Coyote and Crow RPG expansion book. That one's going to be much more writing heavy on me. There's not as much collaboration on that one as far as the writing goes, but it's a setting book focused on a very small location where basically it's set around a single town. And I've always loved the idea of settings in RPGs that are focused on a very small location and diving deeply into that place's history and background and traditions and the individual people that live in that small location. I think you can get a lot of fun out of that. So that's something I'm working on there. And then we have 2 other games, and I haven't really talked about these too much. One is called 7 Clans, and this is an exclusive. I haven't announced this to anybody yet. So we're calling it 7 Clans, and it is a very light, family-friendly card game that is probably takes about 30 to 40 minutes to play, and bases a lot of its tone and theme and mechanics on Cherokee, my specific Cherokee lore and culture. We have 7 within our Cherokee culture. We have 7 traditional clans. Everybody belongs to one, and so this game is about the basic game mechanics are very like family-friendly ones where you're trying to match symbols on cards, and it pulls in a lot of Cherokee lore and a lot of general Native American lore as well. So that's one I'm working with my graphic designer on right now, and then we're working on a card game as well, and that one's set in the same universe as the Coyote and Crow RPG, but it's a tabletop card game that we're hoping is going to really sort of help expand the lore for the Coyote and Crow world. And I think one of the things that can be intimidating for people who are either they've only played D&D or maybe they've never played tabletop role-playing games at all, a 400-page book like Coyote and Crow can be really intimidating. And it's an investment in time and money. So we wanted to create sort of an easy path to Coyote and Crow by creating a tabletop game that you can play a little more easily, that you can play in half an hour, 45 minutes or whatever, but still gives you some of that flavor and maybe sort of leads you to the RPG.
That sounds good. That sounds absolutely excellent. I very much look forward to that, and I look forward to finishing reading the pile of review copies that I've been sent, so I can get to Coyote and Crow at last.
Yeah,
because I've been waiting for months and months, but I I still have 1, 2, 4 review copies to read, and being dyslexic, believe me, I am not a very quick reader, and of course I need to prioritize that. So there you go. But I'm really
I get slower and slower with my reading.
Pardon?
I get slower and slower with my reading as I get older. It takes me longer and longer to get through books.
Yeah, and I should get used to reading from tablets because at least I can do that and have really big font, and that somewhat
Mm-hmm.
helps. But when I have to have with
Yeah.
my glasses late at night, and I'm oh,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
hitting 50, it shows, doesn't it? It really does.
It did. Yep.
Colonel, thank you so much for being
Oh
with me
yeah.
today. It's been a genuine pleasure to meet you face
Absolutely.
to face.
Same.
I'm sure the new Kickstarter will be immensely successful as always.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing you at SM next year, and
Yes.
look
Yes.
forward to your
Let's plan on it.
Netflix contract and the animated series.
Let's hope.
That would be amazing. Thank you very much indeed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for being there. It is truly and genuinely appreciated. And I hope that we'll see you again. Please, please, please help us subscribing to this podcast because that helps visibility an awful lot. And tell everyone about it. It means the world when you do that. And we learn and find out new people listening to this podcast. So please, please, please let us know. More interviews coming very soon indeed. And we're again going to talk with Chris Diaz on a weekly basis to talk about role-playing games and board games in the world. Spiel is coming very soon. I'm going to be there doing tons of interviews. So I would love to have you around. Say hi. It would be great to hear from you. And until the next time, I will talk to you very, very soon. Take care.